Because these integral levels and waves and spheres of consciousness are starting to unfold, and again, every level is integral in comparison to its previous level. A molecule is integral in comparison with atoms. It's just there are certain tiers in evolution for reasons that nobody fully understands, and what happens with what we call the integral levels, meaning yellow or turquoise in the Clare-Graves system, or meaning what Jane Lovinger called autonomous and integrated, or meaning what Jean Gebser called integral a perspectival, is that the process of integration itself starts to become aware of itself. It starts to become self-transparent. And those waves or spheres of consciousness are unfolding, they're evolving. And so you have people that are operating at those levels, but they don't necessarily have terms for them. Now they're aware of what's going on, but they don't have not necessarily have a psychological language, let alone quadrants or levels or lines or states or stuff like that. But as we start to interact with Tami and discuss, in this case, some of the actual nitty-gritty of a business. Tami runs a business that, in my opinion, and the opinion of any of us who looked at it, is a really integrally informed business. And you find that she's intuitively sort of covered all the bases. So there are things for all the quadrants. She has 4 different bottom lines. She has, not only is there meditation, there's a stove actually located in the, I mean, all these sort of areas are touched in ways, some of the smallest details summate in making this business something that really feels like a whole human being can engage in business and not feel violated. And that's a very rare, rare thing in the world. I think it's probably the best simple definition of integral business right there. So what we want to do, again, this is your time. We can take it any way you want. It can be, you know, personal stuff, a little bit more theoretical stuff, more pragmatic stuff, and no holds barred. So jump in. Yes, sir.
The idea of 4 bottom lines sounds interesting.
Sure.
Presumably that's the 4 quadrants. How do you collect the data for that?
Sure. Well, there's a couple questions there. First, what are they? But then the data, that's a tricky question. But just to start with, one of the things I realized is that I began at Sounds True talking about multiple bottom lines very early on and described it to people that we were braiding these things together and that any one of the bottom lines wouldn't be fulfilling or sufficient. And reflecting on speaking here with Ken, I realized that, you know, I keep changing the names of what our bottom lines are. Every year I say something different. So the 4 bottom lines, it could be 5 tomorrow, and I always joke with you that, you know, when are you going to come up with the 5th quadrant? Yeah. Which I always say that because I know it really irritates Ken because, of course, quadrants are 4. There's 4. So if I'm going to ask him about the 5th, it has to be the quintuplet runt or something. What would you call it?
The pin quadrants.
Thank you, yeah. But that's one of my great irritating questions for Ken. So of course there may be, you know, 3 bottom lines, 5 bottom lines, but this idea of multiple bottom lines has always been a really important concept. That Sounds True early on. And we didn't ask the question, how do we build an integral business? As Ken said, you know, especially in 1985 when we started, that language wasn't even available to us. But we've barely asked the question in the last couple years, even since I've known Ken, just kidding. But the question we did ask early on.
See what I mean, how irritating.
Yeah. The question we did ask early on was, how do we have the processes of our workplace reflect the products we're publishing? And we were, as a Dharma publishing company, we were publishing programs by Thich Nhat Hanh and other really tremendously visionary and personally motivating teachers about individual life. And so we asked the question, well, how do we translate these core spiritual teachings into our organizational life? And let's try to do that. And the language that we used early on was, how do we make the process of our work congruent with the products of our work? And really, we held that as a question. And then the idea of the multiple bottom lines came in, because what I realized was important to me was that I wanted to create a workplace that I would have wanted to work in as a person. I wanted to offer that kind of experience to my friends, employees, and the people that I hired. So one of the first questions I said was, well, would I want to work here? Let's create a place where I would want to work. And then a while into it, I realized that I'd created a great business for my employees, but I wasn't all that happy. I thought, it's a lot better to be an employee around here than it is to be me. They've got all these benefits, they can take as much time off as they want, they're not particularly worried about the finance, and I'm up in my office, with 4 million things to do. What's wrong with this picture? So then I asked another question, which is, how do I create a workplace that works for me? So between making the processes and products congruent, creating a workplace for the employees, and creating a workplace for myself, we developed this idea of the multiple bottom lines. So the first bottom line, and to me the most important one, is the business doing something that matters in the world? And this would be sort of our meaning bottom line. Is our business, is this whole endeavor meaningful? And I always come back to that. It's the starting place and it's the finishing place, because if it's not, then all the rest of it is kind of a bunch of rats running around in a cage. Like, why did we do all this? Like, why did we bother to put all this effort and energy and to create great processes? And so that's the first question. It sounds true. I think we're fortunate because we're publishing material that we think raises people's consciousness. So there's a lot of meaning in that. It has been important to continue to talk about it, to make sure that the products are actually doing what we hope that they're doing. So that's the first, it's just sort of the overall meaning of the business. Then the second one, and this comes into me being happy at the company and answering that question, which is, are we evolving as a group? Am I evolving being in this situation? And if my own development as a person is being stunted by interacting in the company, something's wrong with the picture. So there's a sort of personal evolution bottom line. And that's not just for me, but that's for all the people who work there. But it's defined individually. Are you growing? Do you have the kind of lifestyle that you want? So within that, is this a balanced lifestyle? Do you have time, for example, after 2 weeks after our sales manager was hired, and this is responsible for 55% of our business, the part that we really want to grow, our sales into bookstores. We hired this new person. She said, I have to talk to you about something, and it's a little tricky. And I'm like, okay, person's only worked here 2 weeks, what is it? And she's like, I really want to teach a NIA class on Monday mornings. And I kind of went like this. I was like, you want to do a what on Monday mornings? Couldn't you teach a NIA class on Monday night, let's say, even on Friday afternoon? She's like, well, it's kind of tricky. And, and then I thought to myself, well, actually, this is part of what's really important to this woman, is that she wants to go dancing. She wants to teach dance. That's pretty groovy. She's probably going to make me happy when I see her, because she'll have been dancing in the morning, and when I see her in the afternoon, that will lift my spirits. And I thought, that's okay. Yeah, you can. I said, well, let's be clear. She's like, I'm going to work late on Monday evening, and so okay. The second bottom line had to do with this quality of, is this a place where people can evolve? And then, of course, we have our community. Is our community a place that we all want to participate in? Our workplace community, which is an additional bottom line. And it sounds true, we call that the love bottom line. And at the beginning and end of the year, and often in between, I'll ask the question to the people in the business, are we making love around here? And I mean it partially to wake people up from sleeping at the meetings that I'm talking at, and to make the interactions at the copy machine more fascinating, but partially to actually just say that that's part of what we're doing here, is that our interactions should be generating love. And we're going to get to your thing about how you measure that, because of course, how do we know if we're achieving the love bottom line? Are we going to measure that based on how many people stay at the company? Well, no. What our turnover rate is, because in fact, one of our other bottom line, which is people evolving, it may be in their best evolutionary path for them to leave the company, even if there's a lot of love going on. If they really need to move on to a more challenging position, we're not a fast-growing company. So from a career standpoint, there's a ceiling for a lot of people. They have to move to a different type of place that will give them more challenging career options. So that's okay. So it's hard to measure. But what I can tell you is you can feel it. And when people come to Sounds True, they say interesting things like, it feels really sweet around here. People feel really relaxed. The atmosphere is really open. People don't seem to go back to work when you walk in the room, Tami. So I thought that was an interesting comment. I was like, yeah, it's true. Some offices, the boss walks in, people get off the phone. That doesn't happen, it sounds true. But I walk in the room, everybody just keeps doing whatever they're doing.
But relaxed doesn't mean lax motivation.
No, in fact,
people think that's what, that means lazy, or and that's just not true.
No, actually, it's engaged.
Yeah.
They're engaged.
Yeah.
They're relaxed, but they're engaged in being present. They're going to be there for 8, 9, 10 hours, and they're going to take a little bit of time to enjoy themselves at different points in the day, just like I do, and just like I would want to if I worked for somebody else. And then, of course, in this discussion of the Sounds True bottom lines, the idea of our profit bottom line. And the way that we describe that is that it's the oxygen that makes the rest of the company go. And if you don't have oxygen, the patient dies. So if we're not profitable, we're not in business. And we also realize that we have to grow a certain amount. Our growth goals are modest. We want to grow anywhere between 5 and 10% top-line sales in any given year. The rate of inflation, the capacity for people to receive the kinds of raises that they want, buying new equipment, et cetera. If we're not growing, we're not going to be able to realize the other things we want. There's not going to be a whole lot of making love.